Okay. So I'm giving this talk on behalf of Chris Walker, who is the PI of this proposal, and Gordon Chin, who is the principal project scientist. So this is just a proposal for a MIDEX mission. So the call is for next December, so we have to pay in 2 months from now. And that's MIDEX mission is about $300 million cost cap, and the selection will be made in a year from now, and the last selection, the definite selection, will be in 2024 for launch in the end of 2028. So I will give some technical, description of this proposal. After, I will give also a bit of the science we want to do with this, but probably most of you will be more specialist than me. So for the design, the basic design is to send a large, aperture telescope in space based on the inflatable mirror technology. So in fact, this technology was already tested quite a while ago from the space shuttle with an experiment. You see this, which was the EIA satellite experiment. So for this mission, we aim to have a 14-meter, primary test mirror, inflatable mirror. So it will be made of 12.57 micron membranes, and with light, low pressure inside, 3.5 Pascal. And so we need actually, to cover the losses that we will have because of some micrometeorite impacts, to refill, permanently, this mirror, this. With the aim is to have about 180 kilograms of methane to refill this to get about 1 year of operation. So actually, it will depend on how much time we devote to observation during this year. If we are, inflating the mirror, continuously, it will be 8 months of operation. But if we are doing this just only during the phase of observation, not during the maneuver, for example, we can go much beyond the 1 year of operation. So this membrane will be aluminum coated, and the front part of the membrane will be, of course, transparent to the millimeter wavelengths. And the second part, of course, of the telescope will be, the satellite itself, which will be at the prime focus. And there we will have a set of mirrors. In fact, to compensate for the shape of the prime mirror, to get something which is usable, for the wavelength range we want to target, from 80 to 600 micron. So the mirror of the M2 and M3 mirror will be designed to correct, for this non-perfect, prime mirror, which is not a perfect parabola. And then behind this, we'll have some tilted mirror, in fact, to be able to point actually within plus or minus 3 arc minutes. In fact, we'll have a 6 arc minute, a usable field of view. And this will be used probably also for beam switching within this field of view without needing a need to repoint the telescope. And behind this, of course, we'll have a set of heterodyne receivers. I'm not going to give a specific description of what is an heterodyne receiver. It has been given before. So the idea is to have 4 bands operating simultaneously. So in fact, we have a first mirror that will either flip to look at the calibration load, or to look at the bolometer. What will be used, the bolometer we're working around 100 micron, it will be used to point on the targets. And then we'll have several dichroic mirrors to use these 4 bands receivers, which in fact are inspired from the Gusto balloon we were just talking about, which is about to fly next year. So if we look in details at this receiver, so the first receiver, the band 1, is a SIS mixer, which is operating between 455 and 575 gigahertz. So for the basic design, is to be dual polarization and operating in a 2 sideband mode. So we have in fact, 4 IF outputs. So we have 2 times 4 spectrometer behind this. Autocorrectors, covering about 4 gigahertz with 5 megahertz resolution. on the chirp transform spectrometer supplied by a PolarTog from the DLR. With higher spectral resolution, 100 kilohertz, but only 1 gigahertz at a time. Then we have the band 2 receiver, hot electron bolometer mixer, which will cover 1.1 to 2.2 terahertz. And actually, the next 3 receiver will be only single polarization and a double sideband. And there will be only one spectrometer behind this, covering the full band. That's a autocollator of 4 gigahertz bandwidth and 5 megahertz resolution. Then we have the band 3 receiver, which is also targeting the HD line we have been talking about earlier on, with also some flexibility of tuning, more or less plus or minus 200 gigahertz. And then we have the band 4 receiver, which is using a quantum cascade laser for the local oscillator. So we have only a very small, window in a frequency, only plus or minus 5 gigahertz around some high energy level waterline. And all the 4 receivers will be operating at the same time. And this is about an idea of what will be the sensitivity we expect to reach with these receivers. So the receiver temperature will run from 300 to 900 Kelvin inside the 4.5 Kelvin cryocooler. And you have some order of magnitude of the sensitivity will reach in between 10 minutes and 24 hours. And typically, we will be able to go to about 20 hours integration time minimum on any target. Right, that's just an example for the target list, but of course, for solar system observation for SOP, we need short integration times, but for that, we need longer integration times. So just a comparison to other facilities, and you have seen this previous graph already. So OASIS, of course, will cover the band here, which is not accessible by ALMA, of course, because of the atmosphere. And then at the higher frequencies, it will be more sensitive than Herschel and other facilities. And also because we have a larger aperture, of course, we can compare to the Origin Space Telescope, but here we aim to have a 40-meter diameter. So also with the high sensitivity of the receiver will improve the global sensitivity of the instrument. So the pointing will be a bit tricky because actually we aim to have a relatively large flexibility in pointing, basically between 45 degrees elongation from the sun up to nearly the anti-solar direction. But in fact, we have to remain 17 degrees away from the anti-solar direction because we need to have the solar panel which are on the secondary, actually the satellite, which is also the secondary mirror position illuminated, and we want to go down to 45 degrees to be able to observe Venus. But of course, one of the issues besides, the lifetime of the membrane of the primary mirror is also, the torque to the solar pressure. So in fact, we will not be able to stay a very long time at some position. From the latest simulation, we'll see on the next graph, we can go up to 20 or even 50 hours in a direction without doing the wheel floating. And of course, for which we need also to consume some fuel. And the best direction are about 90 degrees elongation and 180. As I said, the instantaneous field of regard, which will be used probably for beam switching, is about plus or minus 3 arc-minutes. And the telescope will be itself able to track, up to 0.3 arc-second per second, which is in fact enough for most targets, including relatively fast-moving comets. And we expect to have a pointing stability around 0.5 arc-second. So these are the order of magnitude we expect for the beam sizes, including jitter, actually for the various bands. Of course, one goal of this instrument is to have both, some high spectral resolution and also, very relatively small beam, especially because we'll be targeting mostly protoplanetary disks. So we'll have a beam typically of an order of 2 to 4 arc-second in band 2 to 4. Which is relatively interesting for proton especially protoplanetary disks. So this is actually not the latest calculation, but it shows you, I mean, how much time we can stay on a target before we have to do the wheel offloading. And as I said, I mean, the optimum is, so this is anti-solar angle, so 0 degrees, but of course we have a kind of sun avoidance of 17 degrees because we need to have the solar panel illuminated. We can go down to 45 degrees from the sun, but of course, when we are pointing closer to the sun and on this position, you can see the time we can stay is shorter. So on this preliminary computation was on the order minimum of 1 or 2 hours. Now it can go up to 20 hours and even 55 hours for the targets which are in the best place of the sky. So most of the observation will be targeted around 160 degrees elongation from the sun when possible. So the mission design, I said, is to be launched at the end of 2028. That's for the MIDEX call. And we'll go in the L1. It will be the L1 halo orbit. So of course, we have to, it will be a large halo, like 800,000 kilometers, to be able, in fact, also to point at the Earth on the Moon, which might be targets. And so the observation should start after commissioning and travel to L1 orbit around the second quarter of 2029. And the threshold mission, the minimum requirement is about 6 months mission. And the baseline is to run for 1 year, and if possible, I mean, extend to 2 years of operation. Initially, it was an idea to be eventually on the trailing orbit like Spitzer, but in fact, if we want to have enough data rate, we need to stay relatively close to the Earth. So you have already seen this word, follow the water trail. That's the basic, I mean, science, driving science objective of the OASIS. So on this plot, you can see the deuterium to hydrogen ratio in water from protoplanetary disk to what is measured in comets. Maybe I should show on this. Yeah. In comets, and you can see, for example, in comets that in some cases we still have some discrepancies. And I will say a few words on this because, in fact, we need some more precise measurements. And as we go down to the solar system, we have Enceladus meteorites, which have a value which is close to the Earth ocean value. On the top right, you have, I mean, the measurement of DTH in hydrogen in giant planets. So the idea is to how, I mean, we went to this the high values we have in protoplanetary disk down to the lower value we have on the Earth or even in the giant planets. So the first objective is protoplanetary disks. I'm not the expert on this. You are certainly more expert than me. So, just a few words on. Of course, we'll cover most of the waterline you can observe in these objects, especially with a small beam. And when we have a beam of 2 or 3 arc seconds, we can start to resolve them in the disk, the closer ones. And the idea is to have, of course, I mean, to cover energy level from 60 to 1,000 or even 1,700 K to map the radial water emission. And in case we have also a giant, we have already, I mean, some exoplanets also to be able to locate, I mean, the snow line where water goes from the gas phase to solid phase with respect to this exoplanet. And we will, of course, observe the HD line. I know what has been said before. The idea was to estimate the disk total mass, but maybe it's not the case for all kinds of disks. But we have also other observation. We can also observe many CO lines if necessary. And the idea, I mean, of OASIS is to be able to observe at least 100 disks from the various stages, from pre-stellar cores to maybe even the debris disk on the class 0, class 1, and so on. So the next, so this is actually an example of line. So we will have, of course, I mean, spectral resolution. So it will be complementary to the small beam to be able to map, I mean, the location of water emission. So these are simulations for various water lines. You see from some are relatively low energy level. Yeah. Okay. Of course, depending on the line width, I mean, because of the capillary velocity, we probe a different part of the disk and be able to determine the water and temperature profile in the disk. So for our solar system, so my specialty, of course, is comets, and these are just examples of cometary lines of water and isotopes. We'll be able to observe simultaneously in the 2 or 3 bands. I mean, at the same time, HDO, water, and water 18 and water 17. That was not possible with previous missions. So because comets can be variable, so it's very important to measure simultaneously water isotopes, and also to be able also to observe multiple lines of HDO, which are in fact still nowadays, I mean, the source of uncertainty of the measurement of D2H in water and comets. We'll also observe IC satellites, and just an example to the upper right, you see that the beam relative to a simulation for Europa water exosphere. So we'll be able to detect, I mean, the exospheres of the IC satellite of Jupiter and Saturn. Of course, in the case of Enceladus, I mean, try to assess the quantity of water which is ejected from its south pole. Of course, we observe the HD line with higher resolution, so it would be also used to have a precise measurement of D2H in a giant planet atmosphere, and observe other targets in the solar system like Titan, Venus, Ceres, Moon, and Earth. We observe also hundreds of galaxies. I mean, to probe, I mean, the water content on the metallicity, depending on the metallicity and so on. I'm not an expert on this. I mean, the IZs will be able to, I mean, to follow, I mean, the water path, especially in ultraluminous infrared galaxies up to a redshift of 0.8. Just to finish, there will be also other science objectives, and especially looking for biogenic species on light hadride. And for example, we can observe also ammonia, phosphine, H2S, HCl, HF, and also, I mean, to compare actually the composition in solar system object like Venus and Earth atmosphere to what is observed in protoplanetary disk and so on. So if you want more information, I suggest you to, I mean, to look at the various SPIE paper of last August, which present at the same time the scientific objectives and the technical design of this proposal for my MIDEX mission. Thank you.
You have a question from Martina?
Yes, I think this idea of having an inflatable telescope is great and forward-looking. How accurate can you actually get the shape? Will it be, and how do you assure that the shape is right? And can you adjust the focus at a minimum, or is there another mirror? Is that being discussed?
I'm not the expert. This is people from Northrop Grumman who are working on this, and that's which is driving the design of the complex. I mean, optics we have here. I mean, because they know. I mean, what kind of shape? I don't remember the name. It's not a parabolic shape you get with this inflatable mirror, but you have to correct that. The M2 mirror is likely around 2 meter diameter, and actually, initially we were looking for a larger mirror, but they had to go down to 40 meter diameter in order to have something which is giving you a beam shape acceptable. I mean, of the what we call the field of regard for all the bands between band 1 and band 4. I mean, this is the work which is done with this. I mean, to have the correct, I mean, for the shape.
Yes, but I think the question is more: how do you ensure, even if it's not a problem, how do you ensure that
it keeps the shape?
The target shape has a good RMS. Your inflated stuff has a good RMS compared to the target.
That you keep, for example, 10 micron accuracy and so on.
Yes.
Well, I'm not the expert. I think there was this experiment, I mean, done in 1996. And I think they have also used an inflatable antenna for telecommunication satellites. So there are some previous experiments. They have done also, I mean, tests in the labs on a smaller scale. And let's say that they expect, I mean, to achieve, I mean, the required, I mean, surface accuracy and efficiency on the combined to the size.
Just a question along the same line. Why do they use methane? Is there a reason for that?
There was two choices. I'm not sure the last choice is methane. It's either methane or ammonia. It's a compromise. I think the deal between methane and ammonia is that ammonia, if you want, you have to liquefy it to be able to enough to bring it to space. On methane, you can only have a compressor. And I mean, they tested several other gases, like I think it was nitrogen, but this is probably the most efficient one they got. I mean, I can't say exactly why, but maybe there are information in the SPIE. There's a special SPIE paper on this.